Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and we make zero trust for secure remote access for industrial systems and critical infrastructure. And today we're going to talk about that as it intersects with VPNs, as it intersects with a new set of changes that have recently come online in NERC CIP, specifically in 3-9. And we're going to talk about why your VPN is a compliance dumpster fire. The tagline. Let's get started. So we're going to talk a little bit about NERC CIP-003-9 and what it means to be remote. We're going to talk about what are the drivers for both the security drivers, but also the remote access drivers. And we're going to talk about the different perspectives of some of the different players. And we're going to talk about a model where everybody can win. It can be faster, better, cheaper for all. So simpler for you, more secure, better compliance, simpler for them. So I suspect the audience is a better expert at this standard than I am, but it's relatively simple. Basically, make things more secure and do it on things that have NERC low impact. So those are what are the changes. Is they talk a lot about they don't want pre-authorized access. Pre-authorized access is you've got the credentials and you can use them anytime. They want to be able to have time of need session initiation, which means that at the time you need it, you log in as opposed to you're logged in all the time. So what they want to avoid is there's a VPN between the customer site, the NERC low impact or medium or high, I guess, to a vendor's office, and the vendor is able to use it. Instead, what they want is at the time you need it, you prove you are who you say you are, and away you go. They want to be able to revoke sessions, which means that if that user leaves the company or something like that, or discover the credentials are being misused right this second, you can click and the session terminates. And they want to be able to have logging, fine-grained audits on who did what when, and that the who needs to be a person, not a company. So you can't have the XYZ account. You got to have the Dawn account. And the problem with the current methods of secure remote access involving VPNs and jump boxes like TeamViewer, they're really not fit for purpose. The VPN, it's a connection to the network, not the resource. As a consequence, if you've got two different people using it, it's up and you don't really know who did what when. It could be up longer than the need of use. There's no logs on, Dawn did this to that. It was more the network was connected and anybody could have done anything. And the jump boxes are kind of the same thing. You might know that I logged into the jump box. The jump box has access to everything on your network. So how do you know what it did? Do you have very fine-grained firewalling onwards from it? Do you have the audit logs on the south side of it? Usually not. So sometimes they talk about having keystroke recording and so on as a way to get there, but it's really cumbersome. Do you want to really troll through a set of clicks and figure out where the mouse was on the screen? No, you want to know that the person reloaded the firmware in that PLC. So that's the problem. What is a session? A session in the VPN sense is the networks were connected and have been for some time. In the jump box sense is I logged in when it did task A and then it did task B. What's the session? And what's the audit when it's all or nothing? So manage remote operations, and it doesn't have to be remote, I suppose. It could be site to site. It could be anything like that. But it's really what we're talking about here is somebody is managing something on your behalf and they're not there in person, and therefore they have a network to do it. And that somebody might not be a natural person. It might be a system. You've got some thing that is polling to make sure it's up, or you've got some big data system retrieving data, or a license manager or something of that nature. But this is going to happen more and more. This is not going away. This is the direction of travel of the universe. Systems are getting more complicated. It's not a simple generator that was put in over in Niagara in 1900. Which is mostly just mechanical. The number of PLCs, the amount of logic in each, the amount of voltage and power involved, the interconnectedness of the grid. 2003 taught us that, a tree falls in Ohio and it goes dark here in Waterloo. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And the number of sensors. So the systems are getting more and more complicated. As a consequence, the skill sets involved are getting more stratified. So instead of having one person that knows everything, you've got one person who knows A and one person knows B and one person knows C. As a consequence, it's no longer having one person come to site to do everything. It's different. It's a cast of thousands to do commissioning. You've got the HMI engineer and the PLC engineer and the control engineer and the automation and the motors and so on. The other thing that's happening is things are getting more interconnected to rely on singular larger platforms. So sometimes we see this with sort of basic hygiene things like license management. As they've switched business models from selling you something to renting you something, they want to make sure that you're not cheating them. So they want a license manager, and the license manager starts to become internet connected. But also you see things like off-net databases. Big data is a bit complicated. When you're just talking about a couple of tags per hour being recorded somewhere, it didn't really matter. But now when you're talking about the volume of data, you start needing databases like Snowflake and so on. So this moves off-net into big data infrastructure somewhere. And efficiency is a bigger driver than ever. Efficiency and waste are counterparts to each other. Waste is a bad thing in the process. Efficiency is good. How do you get more efficiency? You got tighter control, better knowledge, quicker, tighter control systems. So the direction of travel is more and more stuff is heading to be smart and remote and interconnected, which in turn is causing people to worry more and more about the interconnected risk. In 2003, that power line in Ohio with the tree that wasn't trimmed that turned out the power to the eastern seaboard, that's an interconnectedness thing. And what NERC was all about was putting sort of fire breaks in that interconnectedness. You still need the interconnectedness for efficiency. You can't move to having 1,000 little grids, but you want to make sure that there's not a cascade failure between one another. Cybersecurity is the same thing. We're not saying you can't have one person that's able to do everything or that you can't use cloud, but you want to have fire breaks so that when something bad happens, the blast radius is contained. And a VPN is not good at blast radius. A VPN is more or less a conduit for the blast as opposed to controlling the blast radius. And that's what we're going to talk about today with zero trust and strong identity and identity-aware proxies. The other thing that's happening in the industry is SaaSification. I probably didn't make this word up, but let's pretend I did. I don't think it's in the Oxford Dictionary. When I was a kid, we had a farm, we had a tractor. Tractor was simple. The only electronics on the tractor were the headlights. I think it had a radio. And you could start with a screwdriver. It was really easy, just screwdriver. And today, you can't buy a John Deere tractor without it having 5G and live interconnect, and you're not allowed to repair it. John Deere's gone to war on the American farmer. And we're seeing that happen in other industries. CDs, when I started university, you would go to HMV and you browse the stacks, and now it's music as a service. I don't own CDs anymore. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. Greed, capitalism are some of them, but also as things have got more complicated and time to market has gotten more demanding, they're shipping things before they're ready. You see that, Tesla's famous for that. The car was developed after you bought it. The tractor is probably developed after you bought it. The same is true for your PLC. I'm not saying it goes in there with no control system and, it's just YOLO, but there's improvements to the process that are made as you go that all the way through. And the same is true for your HMI and your historian and other stuff. And what's happening is the SaaSification is meaning that more and more interconnectedness in these things is how they function as opposed to merely a supporting thing of how they function. Low impact devices are having cloud needs. Low impact devices sit near medium impact devices. Medium impact devices sit near high impact devices. We're talking about putting in those blast wall radius, et cetera, the cascade failure. This is an area that people want to look at. And the other one is big data. We're in the information age now, industry 4.0 and data and yada, yada, yada. And more is better and faster is better when it comes to data. And it's moved from having sort of monthly compliance reports. Let's get all those spreadsheets together so we can get them filed, to what's a millisecond value driver. It's going to control what we do next. In the energy world, that's what sort of Enron taught us in 2000 is burn, baby, burn. But they were sort of, moving power second by second based on who was willing to pay the most. You've seen that today with data centers, with the renewable power that has non-baseload amounts. You see that with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Who's willing to pay the most? That's where I'm going to sell my power. That's driving you to have that real-time auction and data exchange. And you may have things that you consider low impact that are delivering that, but now they're regulated by this standard. But you've also got other bread and butter stuff like predictive maintenance. When's that pump going to wear out? When's that bearing need to be greased? Inventory, anomaly detection, real-time energy auctions, all these different things. Big data. All kinds of people will talk about edge compute and edge data and so on. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, it will happen in small areas or people that have a lot of money, but it doesn't happen in the mid-range, which is the people that have the majority of the money but aren't sort of NSA funded, and people who have reasonable amounts of data. that's where I don't think it's going to happen. Your people are going to be using the cloud for this. As a consequence, windmill generates electricity, but it also generates data. They both flow into a data center, I suppose. Let's talk about your VPN. So earlier we used the analogy of a dumpster fire. Dumpster fire, nobody would interpret that as a good phrase. Hot mess would be another. But we've seen a lot of challenges with VPNs recently. So what are the good things? Let's start with the praise. VPNs sort of came on the scene at the very end of the 90s, 98, 99, and people were traveling, like myself. You would go to a hotel in some city for work, but you also started to have portable devices, laptops that you would take with you, not mobile phones, or you had a phone, but it didn't have data on it. And hotel rooms didn't have internet. There was no Wi-Fi, but very, very rare. One of them would have an Ethernet jack with a cable modem or something, I suppose. But even that was sort of more like 2000, 2001. You would dial in. There would be a PSTN jack. You would plug it in. And initially, your company would maintain a bank of modems back home, and you call long distance, and you would get your 56K modem, and it would light up, and you'd see that it trained at 28.8, and you'd be pretty happy with that, and you would check your email. The VPN just works. That's where it came about. It was just a way for a remote worker to connect to everything on a remote network. It just works. It's like being there. No initial steps. Once it's up, I can forget it. Set it and forget it. The Ronco chicken thing. The transport's encrypted. I trust this vendor. Everybody likes the VPN from that standpoint. And today it has a bit of a halo effect of from that time. People think of it as a trustworthy technology and a go-to answer. Nobody ever got fired for picking a VPN. Foreshadowing? Well, maybe foreshadowing. So what are the bad things? You have vendors that support you. They support other people. You can't have multiple VPNs installed on a laptop. So if you use Cisco NEX version 1.2.3 and they use 1.2.4, you can't have both. So your vendors don't want to install your VPN. They don't want that. But you get some other ones, like my video calls break when the VPN's up. Well, it's because it's non-split horizon, and that means that all your traffic for your video call is going into the plant and then back out its internet, and their upstream becomes your downstream. It's kind of bad. You can't print at home. Well, yeah, you want to turn off the local network when the VPN's up, right? Because you don't want threats coming in. But I want to print this thing, or I want to control my thermostat, or my vacuum cleaner, or whatever else I got at home. I use a tablet. Well, my VPN client's not available on the tablet. Sorry. My subnets overlap. We both use 10.1.1.24/24, and we overlap. So therefore, one of us has to change our subnet. This is actually a real problem. Every plant in the world has mysteriously chosen the same IP from the same RFC 1918 space. It's a mystery how this happened, but the VPN, because it's layer 3 connection, you got to have separate subnets on both ends. You can't talk to two sites at the same time. And it leads also rise to a shared account medium where the VPN is the connectivity. I'm a credentials to the devices, therefore we're good, right? I don't think this is that good. But the ugly part, we saw this happen with the Colonial pipeline hack in the United States a few years ago, and it's a big deal. This pipeline goes from New Jersey to Houston, and it took down the gasoline supply to the east coast of the U.S., much like the current war in Iran is doing, and it's a big deal. This is a big, big deal. But we also saw CISA come out with 3 emergency directives on specific VPNs. Get it out of service. Like Avanti was one of them, and so on. These things have the keys to your kingdom, and sometimes they're also inspecting your SSL because they're smart. And there's a lot of risk consolidated in that. Coming back to what was NERC CIP all about, it was about making sure that risk had firewalls or breaks in it, so you didn't cascade. So here, these two networks connected, this vendor and this pipeline network, and suddenly bad things happened, and everybody started to rethink, is the VPN, that halo effect, is it real, or has it maybe worn off a little bit? Should I really be thinking of the paradigm of connecting my network to theirs? Is that how I'm going to achieve my NERC CIP compliance? I don't think so. You need to have this time of need and fine-grained session and multi-factor, and bolting that into a VPN isn't really a thing. So think about the different roles involved here. You've got this plant of some sort, industrial control systems, distributed this, SCADA that, HMI, PLC, all your favorite acronyms. And they're moving along and happily doing their little job. And there's a bunch of people then roles that support you. And who are the roles in the ecosystem? Well, the first one is I operate. I own the structure. It's mine. The risk is mine. So if bad things happen, it's my ass on the line. I'm the one who signs my name as the NERC CIP manager and sends to the regulator. I'm the one going to get fined. I operate. This is me. I manage. I run part or all of the system under contract. So you might be the operator of record, but somebody else might run one of your sites for you, or a subset of one of the sites, or some interconnect or something like that. But then you've got these engineering firms. I design. I'm going to put these blueprints together. I build. I'm going to build the plant for you. I support it. I'm the system integrator and break fix, and I'm going to be there to support you afterwards on an ad hoc basis. Or maybe the manufacturer. I OEM the equipment, and I'm Rockwell or something like that. Every one of them has a little role at different parts of the life cycle. The manufacturer might be that license manager. They might be ongoing or predictive maintenance, but they might also be ad hoc. This thing's misbehaving. I'm on the call with them doing support. We're trying to get the logs back and forth. The manager, they might be doing something every single day, might be doing alarm monitoring or something. They each ultimately are unaligned in their interests. The operator's idea of risk is something to be minimized. And the manager's idea of risk is it gets in the way of convenience. As long as it doesn't do that, I'm okay with it. But multi-factor is a good example. The operator might say, okay, we're rolling out multi-factor. The manager doesn't want to let you know there's 10 people that support you, and you're going to give them one account with one multi-factor. How are they going to share that? They're thinking, and put it on a hook on the wall and go up and grab a YubiKey. But you don't want them sharing it. But they view that as just a barrier to getting their work done. And that's the problem that we've inadvertently created with the VPN. So those challenge perspectives, like I said, they're asymmetric. The I operate, they own the risk. So cybersecurity is very important. But I manage, it's more about cost and simplicity and ease. They want everything connected all the time. And then as one of the other things you get is this concept of identity and connectivity and policy. They become a battleground rather than a common ground. So instead of you getting together and saying, well, this is what we all want, they're like, no, I want X and you want Y, and we're going to fight over it and we're going to negotiate it in a contract. And then you get into these acrimonious discussions about backdoors versus pragmatism. We're just going to put an E1 and a TOSI box in with a cellular modem. It gets rid of all this problem, right? It's pragmatic. The backdoor, it's pragmatic. This identity battleground, this is something our product does really, really well. Everybody does single sign-in with their native credentials. That's not a permissioning model. That's an identification model. This is something that's really important, that there's a difference in authentication and authorization and access. Here's one of your challenges. You got a vendor. The vendor has a lot of people work for them. One of those people gets fired because something bad happened. And you've got a shared account, or you created a shadow account where you created a username and password in your system for them. You don't get notified. Their HR team doesn't call you. Or maybe they do at the end of the month, but there's a gap there. And when you create shadow accounts or shared accounts, you're creating friction. Now they got to write that password down. They can't remember it, and so on. Your password strategy is different than theirs. People work for companies. Companies that test their identity by authentication. So most of you run either Microsoft or Google environments, and you log in via Microsoft Azure Entra, or you log in via Google Workspace, and that's called single sign-on, and everything is tied into that. People think of that often as their email. It's like signing into their email. And it's very common to force a partner to adopt a new identity to work with you. So either what I call shadow accounts. So you create Dawn at your company, and I usually use Dawn at my company, but I got to use Dawn at your company, and that's a shadow account. It's got some cost, licensing cost and compliance and management. It's kind of complicated. There's no reason for it. But it's worse when you create the company account. You say, well, Dawn works for A. I'm going to create the A at my company, and then I share it internally. You cannot allow this. That's something your VPN is encouraging. So what happens is that single sign-on concept that's great becomes a shared ID, which is bad. And you might think of it as still a single sign-on. Well, you're still signing in as Dawn at my company, so it's still single sign-on. Yeah, I signed in once, but actually it's a different once than over here. And that way, if my company takes me out of my identity provider, you don't get notified. Maybe there's a contractual obligation within 3 days, but 3 days is a long time. I do a lot of damage. There are lots of cases out there where some disgruntled IT person has done a lot of damage in 3 days, and it comes out in the courts years later, but there's no real justice involved in that. We see problems in the real world happening here. In Florida, they have the Oldsmar water system. TeamViewer shared password. This was an example that came out of this identity battleground issue. So we got a really simple need. NERC CIP, low, got to get my job done. That's the main thing. Compliance is a requirement. Compliance is a constraint, but compliance is not the business. The business has to operate and be compliant. So if you can't get the business done, there's no point in being compliant. And really, you shouldn't run the business if you can't be compliant. But you have a very simple need. For any user, for any system, for any device, for any network, what I need to do, no more, no less, high simplicity, high security. And this is sort of this little schematic at the right. You've got vendor support coming in, and you've got they've got a read-only need to one thing, and you've got the other people coming in, and some of them have access to more things than others, and miscreants can't do anything. If we can just achieve that and run our business, that's actually what we want. We have something called Zero Trust. We're not the ones that invented it, but it's here. And it's a very simple model. There's a lot of standard stuff around this. It seems really complicated. I'm here to tell you it's pretty easy. There's three things you need to know: who, what, and how. Who is that? If I know who you are down to an individual person, called authentication, with strong multi-factor, I got checkbox 1. So as long as I don't have shared accounts and I don't have a thing like a VPN, which brings up the network that they don't have to log into, or they log into with different credentials, as long as it's down to an individual person with multi-factor, I got the first checkbox. The second is authorization. What are you allowed to do? The VPN is sort of like all or nothing. Well, you're on the network. Now we just have a policy telling you what to do. No, if you have technical enforcement, you have read-only access to HMI2 today at 2 p.m. That's authorization. If you have that done on a per person, per resource basis, and then the final one is how. How do you get them there? With no VPN, they're on the public internet, it just works. Who, what, and how. If you have that solved per person, per resource with fine-grained audit and fine-grained permission, you have Zero Trust. It's that simple. And it sort of fixes this shared custody, shared destiny issue, where the operator tends to view the problem as vendor access management. I've got many vendors, and the vendor tends to view the problem as yet another VPN and client identity. It fixes that because the vendor sees single sign-on and everything just works, and the operator sees I control who does what when, and I have an audit trail. Trust but verify, Reagan. It fixes that. So by making authentication be single sign-on with their native identity, but you still own authorization, you've broken that Gordian knot and or cut it, I guess. And then that authentication becomes shared custody and shared destiny. You both have the same objectives after all, which is everybody wants to be secure, everybody wants to get their job done. So, and at the end of it, obviously I said non-zero sum, everybody wins. So you win, you operate that plant, you do it more efficiently, you do it more economically, you do it more securely, and you do it in such a way that's easier to be compliant. It's easier to fill in your reports and show as the standards evolve, you're able to roll with the punches. Your vendors, they're able to get their job more easily because they can do single sign-on, they can use any device, don't have to worry about installing your software. And Agilicus wins because we sold you the kit and we created some value and we get paid. So with that, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel reach out to us, info@agilicus.com, or check out our website. There's a lot of stuff that we post on there, and this webinar we posted there. Thank you so much, and have a great day.